All right, without further yapping here, Bruce, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the most relevant piece is that I lost my colon about 3 years ago. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at 18 years old. I'm now 33 years old. So I battled the ulcerative colitis for about 13 years, 12 years or so. I think that's right. Yeah. And the carnivore diet came after I had my surgery. So I didn't try the zero carb carnivore diet sort of thing until after I had my ileostomy. And the reason why was I'd been listening to Rogan for a while, back in December 2017 when you were there. It was fascinating to me. Obviously, I'm a big fan of strongman and competition, so that was the initial reason I tuned in. And then I started hearing you speak about ileostomy patients, specifically when it came to digestion. That's not something that you hear often on a mainstream show. Um, so as somebody that has an ileostomy, most people are pretty ignorant to that and would say like colostomy or, whatever the case. I found it interesting that you were so specific. And then I did more research into you and your background as a physician and the diet itself. And I was sort of doing the planned no dairy in January sort of thing was the plan. But I was like, you know what? I think January is the meat only month. And that's kind of where it started.
Yeah, Bruce, just for those that don't know the term, because I mean, as a physician, of course, I'm obviously familiar with many of those things. What is an ileostomy? How do you differentiate an ileostomy from a colostomy?
In
And then
my case, yeah,
talk about why they actually took your colon. I mean, what was going on?
yeah.
What was quality of life like? What ultimately made the decision to say, hey, the colon's got to go?
Yeah, so an ileostomy is no large intestine at all, and there are temporary and permanent installations of the ileostomy, loop ileostomy. So basically what they do is, if you can think of, I actually have a video on my YouTube about this sort of crude video where I drew the anatomy of a person and discussed it, because it's not known. A lot of people don't understand this. The ulcerative colitis is Crohn's disease. It's an autoimmune that infects your colon. And basically you have ulcers throughout your colon, lots of bleeding, blood loss. And so throughout that life of ulcerative colitis, I had multiple bouts with anemia and a number of medications I tried throughout that process to try and not lose the colon, which included a number of steroids for a long time. I was on 60 milligrams of prednisone on and off tapers for years. That was the only thing that seemed to help. We tried a few biologics, they're really complicated. The biologics basically stop they're called anti-TNF, and they basically stop the immune system from attacking, those cells attacking itself. And it didn't work for me. I tried Entyvio, which is pretty newish, Stelara. The big one that everyone knows is Humira, and then also Remicade. None of those were successful after many weeks and tons of side effects. So after dealing with that for so long, I had a conversation with the GI, and it was like, in Washington State, where I was at the time, at UW, fantastic, University of Washington Medical Center, Dr. Fakera did my first surgery, and he was basically like, hey, lose some weight, and we're going to do this surgery. Because at the time I was about 390 pounds. And as anyone might know, ulcerative colitis can come in multiple forms. Some people get emaciated, other people blow up from steroids, and that's what I did. And so a colostomy is typically a situation where somebody has a portion of their colon still intact, and that would empty into a bag that is attached to yourself. Whereas an ileostomy is the ileum, no colon, and so the colon is removed. They poke a hole through the stomach, intestines there. You attach an appliance to your stomach every so often. You have to change it. So in my case, I have zero colon, which I think is the most relevant to the carnivore discussion, because it's so often the myth that red meat and animal products are killing your colon. And I can kind of attest to how that happens and what the small intestine actually can do.
Yeah, before we get into that, and I think that is a very relevant piece, let's talk about, because these medications, the Remicades, the Humiras, I used to sulfasalazines. There's a whole bunch of them. There's more and more evolving. These are all immune modulating drugs, immune suppressive drugs. They do have some pretty nasty side effects, and they're very, very expensive, particularly the newer ones. Can you talk about what these things cost, what the side effects are that either you experience or that are out there as far as potential side effects for people with this?
Yeah, so the cost of them is pretty astronomical. You could be looking at as much as a few grand a month for those medications. There are programs, and so I definitely had decent insurance that helped, and there were programs to help pay for that for an initial period. So, but you'll end up with a bill in a lot of cases that is astronomical. The good news for that is there are lots of programs that help, but even so, like without quality insurance or the programs that you can be a part of, you could be out of pocket. I mean, depending on the medication and the severity, tens of thousands of dollars easily for the medication. I mean, it's not much different than cancer treatment in that way. And the side effects are varying. But in my case, I actually contracted lupus, so they called it medically induced lupus, which was I had started taking, and even after surgery, I had the tape on my face, right, that keeps the oxygen in your face. And my face was starting to peel like I had leprosy almost from this terrible lupus. And so even before that, when I would get exposure or a rub on my face, I could just peel the skin away, and it was just like I was decaying. My face was just a mess. It was painful, man. I have pictures of what it looked like after surgery, and then other times where I would just have these giant holes where my face had peeled off. And it was extremely painful. It was like a burn, basically. So that was probably one of the worst scenarios. I also contracted a seizure from prednisone, tapering that for so long. Like I was back and forth on the plane a lot, working in Philly, going back to Seattle, and I was actually changing my son at the changing table, and he was 6 months old. And I guess at that I had a seizure immediately. He stayed on the table. My wife said it was a miracle. And then 3 EMTs had to come and give me Valium to get me under control. I had a full seizure after trying to come off of 60 milligrams of prednisone, probably for the 50th time. I don't know how long it had been. And I was in the hospital, and I came to, and I didn't know where I was. And I guess the nurse told my wife, "Hey, your husband's probably brain dead," and she was freaked out. And I had multiple spinal taps done to see what's going on. They gave me the diagnosis of aseptic meningitis. Which I don't think that's necessarily correct, but it seems to be something that happened from the long-term prednisone use and then tapering either too quickly or too often. So I've been blessed to not have that situation. So if there were all these culminating events, I had not found anything like the carnivore diet to give me relief. So I went to the extreme side of remove the colon so we can try and get this under control, with the understanding that this ulcerative colitis autoimmune disease could come back in the small intestine as Crohn's. For a lot of people that happens, or rheumatoid arthritis. There's a number of issues that could come even as the problem. So that's sort of a more specific detail of terrible side effects that could occur from this medication.
Yeah, and certainly prednisone will lower your threshold for infection. I wonder, before we, because I want to just fully paint the picture of this, what was life like living with ulcerative colitis? I mean, obviously you're doing all kinds of things, going to what some people would say an extreme measure to get it better. So can you talk about the quality of life, how it affected you from 18 until, a few years ago? What was it like? What was day-to-day like? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so day-to-day, when I first was infected, it was just nonstop bathroom visits initially, and it was outrageous. I mean, you're talking 20 times a day. You might have to go and have a bowel movement, and it was just terrible. So you felt like you were sick all the time. You're weak, and you were anemic. And I was, because you're basically bleeding from your large intestine. And when you're going to the bathroom, it's nothing but, I mean, it's pretty graphic detail, but you're basically going to the bathroom and just crapping blood. I mean, that's it. It's disgusting. And so initially, when I first was diagnosed, I was having such bad ulcerative colitis symptoms, and I guess the scope looked so terrible. They were like, "We're gonna have to remove the colon now," and I was able to get past that. And what happens with people with ulcerative colitis? They typically go in waves. So they have the they'll have an like a flame or a flare up, and then it'll sort of go back down into remission maybe for a little while, and then something else makes it flare again. But when you're in flares, they could last for years or days or months. So in my case, I had a small time where it wasn't terrible. And obviously I go back to standard lifestyle and think I'm great again. And then it takes me out like a truck. And so basically all the symptoms of anemia, which is at one point I had lost so much blood because I'd been dealing with ulcerative colitis for years. I'd lost so much blood. I went to the doctor and said, I think I have the flu. And the doctor said, well, let's do a blood test because it's been a little while. I get a call a couple days later. I think I'm nursing the flu. And she's like, hey, you got to go to the hospital like now. I needed 6 units of blood because I'd lost so much blood. It was giving me flu-like symptoms. It was that symptomatic at that point. So life is basically nonstop going to the bathroom when you're driving or commuting or you're going anywhere. You're always concerned. Like I became like Jason Bourne of the bathrooms. And so I was going into places and scoping out where's the bathroom when I walk in. So I would walk in, I'd scope and be like, okay, if I'm in the grocery store, into the bathroom's on this side. If I'm in a restaurant, I'm like, where's the bathroom? There it is. I'd go to the bathroom 2-3 times before I left the house. There were some terrible scenarios. I'm in the car commuting, having to stop on the side of the road, go to the bathroom, or just change my clothes because there were just so many accidents. I mean, it's like you're incontinent as an 18, 19, 21-year-old person going to work, trying to make a career. It was terrible because you're constantly in fear of, am I going to have to go to the bathroom? Or the side effects of the medication that may stop you from going to the bathroom are another set of problems. So like you can't wake up, your glucose levels are all over the place from steroids. You have, my wife and my family can tell you, I was a terrible individual when I was on significant amounts of prednisone. I mean, it was just straight up roid rage with short tempers and just feeling awful. And so life was just war. I could never go back to that. If I had to remove my colon again, I probably still would, or I would have radically changed what I did. And I had never found relief from something like this, like carnivore. So that was just, that life was like, it's almost like a decade plus of lost opportunities of things to do because of the disease.
Bruce, let me ask you, while this is going on, I mean, you got to be thinking, why me? What the hell's happened? When you approached, your physicians, did you ever say, hey, why is this happening? Did they ever have a clue? Did they ever give you any kind of thought? What was it? If you asked those questions, what were the responses?
The most intelligent response would be, hey, you contracted C. diff to get this and your cells overacted, and that, because I had multiple bouts of C. diff, which is another problem that people can get. And they said your immune system went out of control, and it hasn't bounced back. But some other like physicians, I've probably seen dozens of doctors, they'll say, we don't really know. We have no idea what happens with people that have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. We do know that it seems to be genetically linked. And there's nothing you can do to fix this. There's no sort of fix for this problem outside of diet management, maybe, or medication. That's all they ever say is you're probably going to be with this the rest of your life, and you're probably going to be on medication for a very long time that will make life difficult. So basically they're giving you like, hey, this is life now.
When they talked about diet management, did they give you any details and say, hey, this is how we manage dietarily? Did they talk about that?
All the time. The diet was, and it's still regularly discussed in communities of support groups, et cetera. And they parrot the same things that doctors tell them, which is you got to do a low residue diet for as long as you can. And low residue in our case was like basically brat, which is bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast. And it's, so not only are you eating food that is, I think, verifiably terrible for you, you're also eating food that has no nutrition. So in addition to the disease you have, you're also malnourished and feel, and I mean, you can still be a large person and be malnourished. You could eat crap tons of rice, because you can tolerate it for a little while. They also say things like, in some cases, it's mixed messages. Some doctors would say up the fiber for a while, and see what happens. And other people would say you got to stay away from roughage and fiber. But all of them universally would say you've got to stay away from greasy things, which in their mind meant bacon, fat from animals. I mean, really, greasy means fat. And it usually means, they never would say stay away from seed oils, fat. They would say stay away from animal fat or, greasy fat. So red meat was like off the table, right? So basically, even if you were to subscribing to like a vegan idea, that would still be off the table because roughage is off the table. Red meat's off the table. So you're basically stuck with refined carbohydrates, white bread, rice, toast, applesauce, maybe, if you can tolerate it. So, and that's like through a flare. But if your flare is lasting for years, you can only imagine what a diet like that might do for you. And I'm sure there are some people that are able to like tweak and tolerate. And some people have gone like the FODMAP route and things like that. But I tried a number of things with this diet and it didn't, I could fast for days at a time and never feel relief. So, I never thought that sort of thing worked, even though I kind of believed them for a while.
Yeah, and we've got a couple people in the chat talking about their different inflammatory bowel diseases. But hey, let me ask you. So now let's go to the decision point to remove the colon, to have the ileostomy. How did that go? What was that experience like? What was the experience like shortly afterwards? Let's talk about that time period.
Yeah. So I'm probably a little different than others, but I was sort of welcoming it because life had been so terrible. I was like, because I started doing some research of what happens when people have an ileostomy. It didn't seem fun. There are lots of struggles, but I was like, I'd almost rather death at this point. And I had a child, when I had this surgery, and I was still feeling like, well, if I go under and things are bad, like, it's okay because it's still relief. It's quite terrible. The feelings you have of, say, this could be the end of life. And even if you say, well, I'm going to come through it, that life is different and that you're going to change whatever you had expectations of life, before that as a young kid. And so on one side, I was optimistic saying, I really would like to get this maybe resolved. And in the other side, I was thinking to myself, well, this is terrifying because I'm removing a vital organ from my body. And the surgery is quite serious, and all of the recovery of that is no joke. It's like having a cesarean for a woman who gave birth in terms of the surgery they do times 10 because they're also doing other removal of organs. So the recovery is brutal. You can't walk very well. You're basically learning how to eat and live again because your GI is significantly changed. So how you might think you can eat and live and go do things, whatever the case is, that's going to be different. And so there were some good stories I had from people that were, hey, I do, whatever I want with an ileostomy that, even my doctor had one, but, it was still significant change in a life altering traumatic experience, to go through such a surgery. And I had 2 surgeries to remove so in my case, I had to remove the rectum and I had proctitis, so they had to remove the rest of it. In some cases, people can get a temporary ileostomy and they'll reconnect you to the rectum and they'll create what they call a pouch, which is like a small area. But I actually opted for that. There was an option to keep it. And I was like, I don't want this to come back at all because it still could come back in that rectum. And even during the ileostomy, I still had inflammation. So I was like, and I was just so ready to get all of it out because I was to that point where I'd done other things that doctors had recommended, and there's no working that out at all. And the only option was to just remove it. And so it was really scary, and I still kick myself a lot because had I known what I know now, I might have avoided this altogether and had a normal functioning bowel. So that's really the terrible part of that.
Okay, so now you get to the point. Let's talk about you've had the ileostomy. What was the advice on diet at that point from the doctors? How did that go? And then talk about when you decided to say, "Hey, I'm going to do this carnivore thing." After you've had the ileostomy. So what was it like before with ileostomy, before carnivore, and then let's transition into your decision to go on a carnivorous diet.
So, I mean, with an ileostomy, after getting into the hospital, um, after you're in the hospital for a couple of days, they start saying it's going to be time to eat again, and you're given anything you want to eat, with the exception of red meat and roughage, basically. So you could get chicken. You could maybe get a burger. I don't really remember if you could. I didn't have a burger. Basically, they let you have anything else. So it was lots of like pudding, Jello, a couple of white bread. So the idea was we need to get your bowel flowing again. So they give me a very restricted diet, and then they give me this laundry list of things you can't or should not eat. And so they basically, it's like don't eat any roughage, which is all sorts of plants, which in our world, in the carnivore world, that's like okay, obviously. But they also like stay away from red meat, and too much dairy is probably a bad idea too. And so you're still kind of at the low residue side of the diet. They're still basically giving you an easily digestibles, but that's their idea, and non-blocking foods. So when I say blocking, it means your digestion is smaller now. So you have an area where the intestine is kind of moved and looped around and shoved through your stomach. So if you eat something that's too big, you will get stuck. And that happened to me multiple times after surgery. And let me tell you, the blockage pain that you get in that, which is just brutal. And it was from plants. So it was from cucumbers and pickles, right? Eating those. And you have to basically chew them for an hour so you can eat those, and broccoli as well. And they'll mush to the point where you can pass them. But the pain you experience after eating something like that is enough to wish for death. If you were suicidal at all, you'd probably pull the trigger. You're in the worst. I've never experienced pain like that before, and I've had multiple blockages. It's like someone is taking a knife and stabbing you into the gut for as long as the blockage takes to resolve itself or get irrigated. And so that part of the eating was brutal. And so I was also gaining weight, like still, after that. And I was like, this is brutal. I can't eat all this. The only thing I could really eat was like refined sugar and, basically bread, and so in Jello and stuff like that. And that I was comfortable with, because having eaten things that were supposedly healthier for you was not recommended, right? So I was afraid. I mean, you're afraid to eat because the pain is so terrible, or the scare of that is so terrible. And I was like, these plants gotta like digest, right? Like, I mean, they're, and so they don't. And I was trying the keto thing a little bit before I had the surgery, and then after surgery, I was just like off to the races on eating refined sugar and continuing to gain weight. And as your anatomy changes, as you gain weight and belly fat, your ostomy point changes, and you'll have other issues with the adhesive appliance staying on you. So you're going to have all sorts of problems when you're gaining weight or trying to maintain weight. And then the only other option was supplementation. So like they said, well, you still should take a probiotic with no large intestine. Like that was given to me by my doctors, like a probiotic with no large intestine, and vitamins, right? So like take vitamins. I mean, unless you're getting expensive vitamin powder, you've got to break pills up and things like that, because they will not digest in the small intestine fast enough. They go into the large intestine. So there would be just full pills, in the output, if you're taking vitamins that are not crushed And even to this day, if I was to get medication, I have to be sure that it's like liquid medication, because it just won't digest or absorb quickly enough. So I was done with it. I was like eating, I was eating some dairy, like drinking heavy cream and stuff, and that could pass it, but it was just not ideal. And so I listened to the podcast with you and heard the residue and the digestion is so easy. Even in ileostomy patients, we see this. And I was like, hang on a second, man, I got to try this out. And so I was mostly like curious to see, because I have the fortunate ability to see what would come out of the small intestine and go into a large intestine. And I was curious about the digestion.
Yeah, and I want to get into that because that's an important aspect. So what happens in the small intestine, because, when we hear people saying meat rots in your colon, what actually gets to the colon, assuming you had one, because what happens right before, because you can see what comes out of your ileostomy, which would normally go straight into the colon. So what's going on? And that's very interesting about pills and stuff like that we, so many people are taking supplements and pills, and basically what you're saying is they don't even get it digested. So tell me about what actually, does meat rot in your colon? What happens when you eat just meat? Compare it to, like you mentioned, broccoli and pills and stuff like that. What's actually getting to the colon and what's not?
Yeah. So, what happens with any roughage of any kind, pills, etc., that do not digest quickly enough in the stomach and small intestine, you basically just have the output of the whole food in your bag. So when you eat a seed or a nut or something like that, you're basically getting that output, what you chewed, into your bag. So the only thing that would make sense for a colon to work would be some sort of fermentation or microbiome that you have to develop in the colon to even break that down, which is, to me, seems like a difficult battle. So meat, on the other hand, is clear output with basically just bile and chyme and water. Chyme is the mixture of things that happens when it breaks down food. It's CHYME. The only thing you see when you eat meat, especially if the meat is mostly raw or not too charred, if you have it charred, that doesn't really digest much in my case. Let's assume my gut is similar to other people. I don't know, but if I eat seared steaks, there is some residue from the sear, so that doesn't really digest very well. The charred bits, but anything that's not charred or very raw meat, and I don't eat raw chicken, so I don't know, but ever since then, whether it's raw fish or raw meat, it is instantly digested in the small intestine, and the only thing that I get in my ileostomy output is bile and water and chyme, which is just the things that break down food. There is no red meat. There's no chunks of meat coming out in the colon, in the small intestine. The way that people would have you believe is that you would eat this meat and it gets stuck, and then it goes into the colon, and you have all this undigested red meat in your bowels, which makes no sense to me at all. There would be a possibility, I think, with burgers that are completely done, that they would get stuck in your bowel, because when you eat a burger that is fully cooked all the way through, especially well done, that is in the output. So I will see, like, it's actually harder for me to eat burgers than it is steak, because burgers are cooked through and they actually make me kind of ill, almost like I have a reflux or a difficulty in digesting a fully cooked, well done piece of meat. It's really hard to digest any amount of it. And like if I were to eat like 4 pounds of ground beef, it'd be difficult, but I could eat 3 pounds of ribeye that's mostly raw inside and be smooth sailing.
That's fascinating. That's really good information. I think that's something. So, I mean, I know there's, like, when we talk about how do you like your steak cook, I mean, I think people that like steaks usually go for less cooked. They tend to go to medium rare to rare type of stuff and just kind of sear the tops. I constantly go back and forth with my better half, and she likes her steaks, in my view, ruined, well done. And I'm just
yeah. I find them difficult to eat when they're well done. I think that, I mean, even just anatomically, it's kind of hard to chew and then digest. It's a brutal experience, actually. I've even dabbled in just eating raw ribeye. I don't really love it. I much prefer a sear. It just tastes better.
Yeah.
But I mean, when it's cooked through, I really just don't eat it.
Gotcha.
You know.
Yeah. So let me ask you another thing. So we hear, the microbiome, the short chain fatty acids that are elicited by digestion of or fermentation of fiber in the colon is crucial for us to be healthy. Now, when we say it's crucial for us to be healthy, you don't even have a colon. So how are you alive without these magical fibers?
Yeah, I hear it a lot. So if I listen to podcasts where you start hearing people talk about gut microbiome, and who comes to mind? Well, I don't want to bring up names, but people that you listen to on major YouTube channels, they'll talk about the microbiome like it is this magical alien force that you have to have inside of you. It's basically like the Holy Spirit for them. You have to have like this microbiome that's in perfect alignment so that you will have mental clarity and performance and longevity. Longevity, I guess, is a discussion that, maybe we could have when I'm 70, but at this point, no microbiome at all. I've been in better health and mental health and just feeling better than ever, not having a colon and eating red meat. I've definitely had bouts where I've eaten, cake and stuff and had backslides on the diet, but that's an emotional problem. That's not a food nutritional issue. That's more of a, hey, I'd like some cake and it tastes good. But the carnivore diet is very little microbiome, I would assume, because there's no output in there to even create something in the small intestine if that existed. And then I have no colon. So you would think that without the microbiome, I'd be deficient. I just had blood work done less than 2 weeks ago. I've had blood work done multiple times. The only issue with the blood work, everything's within normal range. Vitamin D, all the way through the inflammatory markers, white blood cell count, metabolic markers, everything's fine. I have lower testosterone than is in the normal range. But that's also, I'm still kind of a big dude trying to lose it, right? So like when you have a larger BMI, your testosterone is lower typically. But let me tell you, like you're a weightlifter and you're in incredible shape. Within ileostomy, last year, I squatted 600 pounds. I think that's a good measure of health. Now I'm a big dude, still trying to lose it, but I'm able to row, lift, run, bike, and squat 600 pounds, deadlift 300 without any problems. And I also, my career is actually in software development, so my mental clarity has to be pretty great. I have to be able to analytically think and, solve problems quickly. And sometimes I only get 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep because I'm fixing a production outage at night. There is nothing to me that indicates that I have a deficiency in a microbiome that is required for people to function at a high level. And so that really, the microbiome thing kind of puzzles me when people get so up in arms about that, because I obviously have none or very, very little with no large intestine. So unless there's some microbiome being created in the small intestine that is required, I don't really understand the argument at all. To me, it seems like a whole lot to do about nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I made this point several years ago. I said, hey, what about people with colostomies or ileostomies that live normal lives? They don't have a microbiome. I want to, what was I going to say? Oh, one question I would ask you, what about folate levels? Because one of the concerns about a carnivore diet is you might be low in folate. And what I understand about human physiology is much of the folate that we ingest is made by a microbiome. So do you have any issues with folate, or have you checked that?
I've never checked folate, I don't think, although I could check the last blood work I had and see. I mean, the only thing I really looked at as far as blood work was normal values. So I looked at to see if there was any outliers or anything like that. I could actually pull up the results right now. I had them somewhat available. Actually the person that I spoke to help with this was Dr. Sivas, who was just on, and he actually called in this order.
I guess if you have a CBC, you might see something like if you had macrocytic
RBC,
anemia,
right?
you would see like an elevated MCV,
Mhm.
mean
So
corpuscular volume or
there's
something.
folate and hemolysate and RBC are both within the normal range.
You said folate what
319,
too?
yeah, folate, fully within the normal range.
Nice.
Reference range of the RBC for folate is greater than 498 nanograms per milliliter. Mine's 665.
Nice.
And so, I mean, I don't think, like I said, the only issue with this blood work, as far as normal ranges are concerned, my vitamin D is on the lower end of the reference range, but it's still within normal range. And who knows,
That's
like
fine.
blood work is just a snapshot of that day.
Yep.
And then testosterone is 217 nanograms per deciliter. So I think the reference range is larger, but when you have a higher BMI, you'd have a lower testosterone. So
Well, I mean, you're squatting 600 pounds, man.
yeah, I don't. I mean,
nice.
also, Doc, I've had since I've had an ileostomy, okay, and since I've been carnivore, I've had 3 children, three children. I've had we currently, this is kind of, my wife's pregnant again. we're pretty close to it. We're about 12 weeks in. I think. Thanks. So we have a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an 8-month-old. And I've been carnivore for everyone with the first child. And after an ostomy, after eating just meat, I am as virile as they can be. I have no problems with any sort of manly issues, whether it's strength, intelligence, or having children. The whole idea that this is like going to kill you because you're going to be less than a man with low testosterone or whatever the levels might be. Like, you've had this discussion, your testosterone blood levels, people think it's silly. It's like, come on, dude, I'm strong and having children. What else do you want from me?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of issues that people don't understand clinical function versus relative lab values, and there's a lot of other factors going to that. But let me delve into, well, what is your diet? You said I just eat meat. Tell me what that is. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I mean, I will be upfront and say that I've had backslides in terms of, so my diet's consisted of meat since talking to you, and backslides into sugary crap. So there's definitely been like emotional eating with donuts and stuff, right? But that's like, I don't care who you are. Nobody's going to claim that eating donuts is healthy for you. We all know this, okay? So, but the meat is the primary food. So my diet consists of ribeyes, eggs, cheese, because I can tolerate it, and occasional smoked meat. So I like to smoke ribs and brisket and stuff. And honestly, I'll say, I don't know if ancient man smoked food because it doesn't digest as easily, and it tastes great, right? Like, it tastes amazing. I love brisket, right? When I make a long 24-hour smoked brisket, Texas style, it's great. But I can't eat much of it because the fat's really heavy in there and it doesn't digest as well. It kind of makes me feel kind of really full really fast. And I don't love it. I can pound 3 pounds of ribeye in a sitting. So I typically eat, at this point, I've been fasting a lot. So I'll eat a giant meal of eggs and ribeye, maybe some cheese, or maybe a bacon. And then I'll fast for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. I've been going pretty long on a fast. But typically it's just, standard red meat, real rare. I mean, that's cast iron, minute on each side. It's basically hot as it can be. And then, a couple of eggs and some pieces of cheese. And then I drink coffee and some heavy cream. And that's about it. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it.
You haven't felt compelled to eat liver and brains and thymus and trachea and lung or taking organ meat supplements or anything like that? Is that part of the regimen?
No, I haven't done anything like that. There's been no sort of like, you got to eat grass-fed quality meat only and organs. I don't. I like liver; it's fine, but it's not a regular part of me. I bought a cow, and I don't eat the offal. I have it because it comes with it, but I never really eat offal at all. Any of the liver or anything like that.
So with an ileostomy, I imagine do you still regularly follow up with a GI surgeon, or are you with a gastroenterologist that's still following your progress? Because as you pointed out, UC can often convert to Crohn's, and then you have the small intestinal issues are you still being seen? And if so, are they saying, hey, what's going on? And are you talking about the diet at all?
Yeah, so I had a scope. Oh, I had a little bit of a scare because I thought I was doing all of that heavy lifting, and I was like, I hope I didn't have a hernia from this. And because if you have a hernia, you could make it hard on your digestion because it'll push against your GI there. But no, they did a scope, and he was like, looks great, no inflammation, everything. There's no constricting of the bowel. There's no sort of small areas. There's no sort of inflammation that we can see. And that was January, I think, January or February. And it was just a quick in and out sort of scope. So they sedate me because it's still kind of painful to have a scope go in your intestines. It's pretty local sedation. They go in there with the scope, take a look around. They took pictures, and everything's great, and there's no, and even in that's even with eating some crap from here and there. But the main diet for me is if I'm not being an idiot and emotionally eating, it is just meat and eggs and cheese with no inflammatory problems.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar. I assume so. They went through your ileostomy for the scope, and they just kind of ran retrograde up the ileum and checked out as far as they could.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, basically all the way
about
the jejunum, I guess, is where that was.
They got all of your jejunum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty good. That's a long way. It must be. I don't know how often they scope small intestines. It's probably less common than obviously upper and lower. But let me ask you another thing. Ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, both are kind of autoimmune diseases. They have a lot of overlap. Some convert to others. A lot of people. I mean, that is becoming more and more common. There are, at least 1 million people in the U.S. suffering, I think, from ulcerative colitis. I don't know what the Crohn's numbers are, and it's gaining in incidence and prevalence. And then there is some evidence that IBS, inflammatory or irritable bowel syndrome, puts you at about a 1,500% increased risk of developing IBD. So this community is getting bigger and bigger, unfortunately. Are you still involved in the IBD community, and are you talking about a carnivore diet, and how is that being received?
So, yeah, okay, so a couple things. Number one, I don't have any residual effects that are affecting me currently, whereas the autoimmune disease, people will say you could, if you have Crohn's or UC, you could likely experience something else because of the autoimmune. So you'll probably get arthritis, you'll probably get some other problem. I haven't had any of that. No problems. If anything, I'm better than I was. I was probably experiencing some form of joint discomfort and, rheumatoid arthritis symptoms during the flares. Now I'm fine. I have no sort of problems with joints or any other autoimmune issues that I can see. As far as what's happening now in the IBD community that I'm a part of, there are a couple of them. I mostly follow ostomy, but there are still I'm in a number of groups that I follow that are UC patients doing the woe is me stuff all the time. Okay. And I don't want to be, discompassionate or a douchebag, right? I don't shove carnivore down their throat. I definitely have mentioned carnivore when it comes to how I might, feel relief. I've actually coached and helped a few people. One person I know, he's a great friend of mine. I love Joe to death, and he has Crohn's, and he has been able to completely almost eliminate his symptoms. He has times here and there where things flare, but there's somewhat anomalies. But I mean, his life is so much better. But yes, when you start going into the UC world, step into their meetings or their forums, it is all sorts of the same dogma you experience in the vegan world or anywhere else. People say there was one instance where someone told me I was basically being dishonest and hurting people with such advice. It's very dangerous advice. It's the same stuff you hear from doctors, or they're basically parrots for the standard doctor visit that you might go to for a UC visit. They're basically saying the same stuff. I mean, there's not a lot of variance there, and there's all sorts of I got to supplement with this, or I got to do this sort of regimen because, I'm a snowflake that has this problem, that's only particular to me, And it's so hard for me to really say that I could have eliminated everything if I still had my colon. But I mean, from all the evidence I can see, I think if I would have found this way of life, I would have probably retained my colon and been dealing with putting things into remission. But,
Yeah, there's a fellow by the name of Adam Viskovich who I interviewed on my other podcast a couple of years ago. Same sort of situation. You know, he'd had, I think, a decade of ulcerative colitis, and he fortunately found carnivore and basically got off all meds, became symptom free, and you know, was able to do it fortunately early enough. I think, you know, Bruce, I got to tell you, this has been a wonderful, and so glad we put you on here. This is going to hopefully reach a number of people and hopefully start to change it. I know so I was approached by a physician that's that's a general surgeon that deals with a lot of, you know, GI stuff and does some of these colectomies and these surgeries and wants to do research on carnivore in this IBD space. So hopefully we'll be seeing some research trials. As you know, I'm passionately trying to get a research clinical trial done on the carnivore diet just to get the ball rolling and started. And then hopefully we can start to see these, you know, these other things, because I think it is probably the best possible treatment for IBD. I mean, that's just my opinion based on what I've seen. It would be nice to have clinical trials to further back that up. But I mean, my gosh. Let me ask you this other thing, because you did kind of touch on this, but you know, you said I had developed a sort of a drug-induced lupus, and you're absolutely right. If you get one autoimmune disease, you're liable to get 2 or 3, 4 other. I mean, that's just the way it works, because I think the same, probably there's a common pathway for a lot of these autoimmune, and many people would say it starts with the gut. I know Alessio Faisano, I think out of Boston Children's, there's done a lot of research with gut permeability and the subsequent development of autoimmune disease. And so any other, so the lupus, the other, you've had none of that. That went away, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been retested for lupus, I suppose, is whatever other blood tests they might do to check your lupus markers again, but I have 0 symptoms. It's completely gone. They pretty much told me that, you know, this is probably medically induced lupus that you have. So, you know, stop the medication, maybe it'll go away. And it's not come back at all. And I've kind of tested the waters when it comes to skin, and I'm able to exfoliate my face, you know, rub it, whatever I got to do, and I don't have the same problems. So I'm assuming I haven't had an official blood test to tell me lupus is gone, but I have 0 symptoms like I had before, you know, related to that.
Well, I mean, that's great to hear. No, we didn't mention this, but you had some, you know, you said at the beginning you're 390 pounds, but you had a significant weight loss as well.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so initially I lost 135 pounds fully to the carnivore diet, doing basically the same thing we all say: eat red meat until you're full, and that's it. I put back, about 80 pounds when I started goofing around with donuts and other garbage, emotionally eating. And so the thing that carnivore does is it gives me all the relief I need from a dietary standpoint, but from an emotional management standpoint, that is another situation that people have to get under control. And so if you look to other foods to emotionally manage, it's not going to work the way that people might think it will. So but in the past 3 months, I'm doing it again, and I've been also fasting, and I'm down 34 pounds in 2 months. So, I mean, I'm back on the train. I'm still lifting and working out hard through the whole time. And, you know, I was still eating, the majority of my diet was all carnivore. There's never been a vegetable introduced, never, unless you would consider a refined carb, emotional donut binge a vegetable. But I will say, like, eating carnivore and then also secretly eating carbs is probably the worst thing you could do for your weight gain. It's just a lot of food, and bad, you know, just glucose is through the roof when you're eating stuff like that. But, you know, I've gotten under control now, and that's kind of why I reached out to Dr. Silas that I've been working with, because I was like, hey, I would like to make sure that, like, you know, let's work together to make sure that I've got these emotionally, you know, induced eating problems under control. And when I do have that under control, I am smooth sailing, losing weight, feeling great, you know, just feel amazing when I'm eating just meat, you know.
Yeah, and obviously Robert's, and we're going to have him on. He's coming on. I'm talking with him, getting him back on the podcast to chat. But he, one of his big thing is the addictive nature of carbohydrates or sugar and that sort of thing, and that's clearly the case for many people.
Yeah.
I'll put a plug in for our platform. Like I said, I think support is very helpful, and we appreciate you as a member of the community, and I hope you will lean on us as much as you need for those types of emotional, psychological, support, accountability type issues, because I think that's a huge plug. That's a huge part. I keep saying, when people ask me what supplements do I need, I said I think support is probably a more important supplement. So I think that's truly really wonderful. Oh, you mentioned glucose. Were you at one point a diabetic, pre-diabetic? I can't imagine you maybe weren't, but I mean, what
They
did you ever have?
tell me I was. Whenever actually, the one thing that was interesting is even though I was a big dude, my glucose was still relatively stable in all the times I was in the hospital. So I guess I'm just genetically gifted that way. When I eat carnivore now, my glucose stays somewhere around 80 to 90. If I work out or mornings, it's not really a fair estimation, but I never crack 100 unless I have taken my blood sugar really early in the morning. But if I take it normally, so I don't have a problem with glucose that I can tell.
Yeah, and again, there is some thought, and people talk about this personal fat threshold, where some people get obese before they get hyperglycemic. We see the opposite in like Asian populations, where they get relatively hyperglycemic really fast, quickly, rather than get obese. I would suspect maybe, early on, if they were to check the fasting, an insulin level, you might have had higher insulin levels to keep that there, and then you might have. Anyway, the good news.
Yeah, it might have been very possible. I mean, I didn't have any diabetic discussion, but at the same time, like, I had all the symptoms of someone that was diabetic in terms of like water retention and feeling terrible and having all other sorts of issues when I'm bigger. But the good news is seems like I can lose weight relatively quickly. But I could also put on weight really fast. So, I mean, it took me not long at all after eating poorly and binge eating emotionally to put on 80 pounds, like no problem. So, but I lose it really well when I eat carnivore, and I feel the best, easily the best when I eat red meat.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. I'll tell you what, like I said, Bruce, I want to again thank you for coming on. This has been incredibly, real life perspective, real life information. I think is actionable for a lot of people. This has been invaluable for people that are suffering from any kind of gastrointestinal issue, particularly IBD. Let folks know where they can find more about you, your story, get in contact with you, any social media that you might have.
Yeah, so you can find me Bruce Willke on Instagram. I've got a YouTube channel that I post just random stuff. But actually, in your comment thread the other day, someone messaged me after I had mentioned something on Instagram, and I gave them, a ton of information. So yeah, just if you have questions about ileostomy or you see, ulcerative colitis and carnivore, send me a message on Instagram. Find me Bruce Willke, or I've got YouTube, or even in MeetRx here. I'm part of the community, so you can send me a note here, or when I hop on the meetings. So people that have UC or IBD, I can definitely give some of my experience.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. You guys, thanks for tuning and listening. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bruce, have a great day, and steak timber, guys. Let's get it going. All right, everybody, take care, and we'll see you guys later. Bye-bye now.